Welcome back, everybody. We're going to work on part 3 now of this Razor Pages with EF Core app, and we're moving on to complete the actions that you see listed here, which are sort, filter, and paging. They also throw in grouping down here too. And for those of you that have been kind of following along with this, you know where we're at, but we are completing part of a larger tutorial. We're doing it kind of in steps because there's a lot of little steps going on here. For the students in my classes that are doing this as an assignment, this is a larger point value assignment. It's kind of like 3 or 4 assignments combined into one in sort of our final for the semester, at least for the summer of 2024. And if you remember, we were building this app that is a little bit more complex in terms of the structure of the data that we've seen before. But some of the techniques that we're using are basically the same. We're just taking it up another notch, basically. The other kind of reminder here is don't forget that the source code is available from Microsoft if you need to look at it to fix stuff or to compare. That's not a bad idea. I do that once in a while too when I'm following somebody else's work and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what did they do? How did they do it? Where did they put stuff? Looking at the finished version often is very, very helpful. All right, so the next little part here, which it says right there, so we're adding, these features. What they're showing here in the image, and it says that it shows a completed page. The column headings are clickable, so we can sort the column, right? And this is a real common feature we see in apps. It's kind of like a spreadsheet feature, for people that work with apps like that. If you click a column heading repeatedly to switch between ascending and descending order. So in other words, if I click on last name, it would sort by last name. If I click it again, it would reverse sort and start with Z and go the other direction. All right, so first step, if you haven't done this already, fire up Visual Studio, bring up your project again. I just have mine kind of ready to go here in the background, and then we're going to start editing some pages. Let's get into the project. This one here is named Contoso University, so I'm going to open that solution. I'm going to let all my stuff load up here. All right. And then we are looking for specific file. We're looking for pages, students, index, CS.html, the CS file sitting behind it. So pages, students, index, which is down here, and then we need the CS file. All right. Now, we're looking now to add this little snippet of code here. And I want you to look at the whole thing, right? It says replace the code in this file with the following code to add sorting. So I'm going to just copy the whole darn thing. It does say to replace it, which includes removing everything else that's already in here. But I'm going to be really cautious with this because I know that we're working within the namespace and all that. What I'm seeing is that they're really looking just to replace this code, right? So basically everything that's in the public class that extends the page model. We still need the namespace. We still need these using statements because otherwise Razor is not even going to work. So I'm replacing that code there. So here we go. Paste it in beautifully. If you take a really quick look at what's happening here, looks like they're putting in the context here of the data objects, but notice how they're setting up basically getters and setters for being able to sort things. So like we're doing this preemptively, right? We're setting up structures to allow us to change the structure of the data that we're looking at on the screen that's traveling in memory. Once again, we see the async here, right, to allow us to basically work with the stuff and have maybe possibly multiple users trying to hit the system at the same time doing the same thing. And then basically handling all that threading that's happening in the application. All right, so that's the first edit. And now they do add some stuff here, right? So it says requires adding using system, and let's go back to that for just a moment here and save that. And even though they're calling upon that, I'm not sure that I'm seeing that using statement here. So we'll see if that's really actually what we need to do. Oh, I see. Okay, so they're really including that little piece. And I don't know if we have to uncomment that or not. I'm not really sure. Um, and you know what? Let's just uncomment. I'm just curious to see what happens. There's okay. Well, it starts to underline red, so that's not good. So let's leave it the way it was for right now. If we need to add it, we will. But if we're going to add it, I'm curious as to why it's being added here, not at the top of the document. They go through and start explaining why they're doing the stuff they're doing here. And basically, they're explaining what all those data fields are that we added with the getters and setters. And then they're also indicating basically here, how they're setting up sort algorithms in order to make that happen. Now, for those of you not familiar with these, I think they call them ternary if statements. And that's basically where we see this question mark and the colon. And really what they're doing is they're checking, this is the action, based on if, this is the thing we're checking for true and false. And this is the action if true and the action if false, right? So, and the same thing's happening here. So we got two ternary if statements. Now they're calling it conditional operators here. I know in other languages we call it, ternary ifs, whatever. Doesn't really matter what you call it, but it's basically an if else. And the advantage of this approach is there's one action in the true and one action in the false, and a simple statement that we're checking typically, and you can write it concisely on one line of code, and not only write it, but then say that the output of whatever that creates into a variable if necessary. All right, so they're talking about the sort order that they're predetermining here. So like last name ascending and descending, date ascending and descending are the ones we're really focusing on. All right, so the next thing it says here is the method uses link to entities to specify the column to sort by. The code initializes an iQueryable student before the switch statement and modifies it in the switch statement. So in other words, you basically are looking at this little data structure here, and we're indicating basically that it is queryable in the sense that the thing that we're outputting can then be treated as its own set of data that we can run a query against and extract information or whatever, manipulate that information. And they're indicating here basically based on a switch case statement how we're going to sort based on any one of those things being true, the name description, the date, or the date description. And then there's a fallback. So, and there's the fallback is to order by last name, which would kind of make sense, right? Like that you would think that maybe that would be the default order for sorting a student. So that's why that's the fallback. Now what I'm going to do here really quick is I'm going to just check my code to see that these statements are already here, right? So it's not something we're adding, we're just looking at it. And then they finally show here, right? And once again, notice the use of await here, just in case you're hitting the system too hard with too many users, to basically call in this particular single query. And it's not actually triggering a query until we run that command is kind of their point. All right, so let's move on to the next task here, which is to add column heading hyperlinks to the student index page. Now we have to change, that default page. So all the stuff that's in green are the changes or updates. So let's just kind of address these one at a time. So inside that first razor directive, we're going to change up the title. So let's go, and this time we're looking, by the way, at the index CSHTML file under students, which I have here. All right, so we're changing the title. It's going to be called students now instead. The next thing we're doing is we're adding an H2 in there. I don't know if we're replacing something, and it looks like we're just adding here. So now I'm trying to be careful because this does not look like the same code, does it? All right, so am I looking at the right file? I am not. So let's Control Z that. Right, so it's not this index file. This is this index file under students, which is here. So no wonder it looks different. So let's get the right one in there. So we're pasting it in there. Oops. All right. We got to go back and recopy that. Now I could, I guess in principle, just grab the whole page and paste the whole page in there, but then you're not kind of seeing the progress of how you're adding things. We're going to change the H1 to an H2, and we're going to call it students. And then we're going to leave that paragraph there. Then there's the table, and then in the header rows is where we're going to add some of these changes. So in the TH tag, let's grab this first one. Copy. And notice how it's throwing in these things here. I am getting some red underlines here. I'm trying not to go into panic mode over that quite yet. So let's copy everything over and then see if we can fix the reason why it's doing that. Yeah, it seems to like the singular better than the plural. And then down in the body section, we have our for each loop, and that's also changing to the plural. So I assume that at some point we're going to fix that to get rid of the underlines, because all of them at this point are underlining. So I wonder if they address that. All right. All right, so they're not addressing that change, which concerns me a little bit. And let's just hover over this, and not to be weird about this, but I'm looking at what we're declaring up here. I mean, and you see we have students with the plural, so I'm a little frankly confused by it. But notice all the errors that it cascades and creates. So this is kind of interesting. Let's see if we can figure out why this is happening. All right, so I figured out where I messed this up, and you can see I'm like on a different file right now. So when I was asked before to add all this code, right, the switch statement, and I remember I was questioning this and all this stuff, I put it in the wrong spot. So the same way that I put in I almost started changing the code in this index CS HTML file, I did put the wrong code in the CS file. So I'm going to Control Z my way back. So I'm trying to be really methodical. Okay, so that's back to where it was. Now I'm going to save that one. And so we're going to go back. And so so we yanked this one back to where it started from. And then this file is going to get the changes that we put in. So now you see why it makes sense, using system, right? Because it's there. And hopefully that takes away the red underlines in the other part. All right. Given the fact that just by messing with that change, right? You saw the red underlines go away, we're on the right track. But yeah, pages, students index. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that was me basically screwing up. So let's go back and fix that. So we're grabbing all that code again. Once again, we're going to change just the stuff in the public class here. So let me make sure I'm highlighting all the stuff, pasting. No red underlines. That's a wonderful thing. Control S to save. Now we can go back to where we were before, which is, we made these changes, and I want you to notice now that file, this one, has no red underlines. They all went away. So the plural is correct now. This one also needs to be saved. And then we're at the point where they're asking us to test. Okay, so run the app and select the students tab, click the column headings, and let's see if it sorts, basically. So not a lot, really not a lot of work to do. I mean, yeah, the data setup is a little tricky. I wouldn't expect you to know how to do that off the top of your head, but with an example, you should be able to kind of work that out. Let's run it, see if the column header sorting is actually working. So Control F5 to run the app. It's doing a build right now. There it goes. Let's wait for it to launch in the browser. Let's see which screen it comes up on here. There it is. Thankfully, right in the main screen. So we're going to go to students. All right, now you can see the underlines here, so I can try to sort by last name. So now I'm doing a reverse sort. So it's like the last letter going to the first and then back. And then of course I can sort by enrollment date. And you see there's kind of like a mix of years here. So we can lowest date to highest or highest date to lowest, and then sort the names back. So you can see it's working. Not a lot of code to accomplish it, but powerful feature for sure. And it's kind of one that we expect in tabular information, by the way. It's a very normal type of feature that people look for. Okay, well, hey, let's find that name. It's easier if it's sorted, that kind of thing. So useful for sure. All right, let's go back to the correct screen, wherever the heck that is. All right, and so now we're going to work on our filtering. So to add filtering to the student index page, we're going to need a text box and a submit button. And then the text box applies a search string on the first or last name. The page model is updated to use the text box value. All right, so now we're going to go back into that student's CS file, so behind index, and we're going to add a little bit of code here. So we're just kind of ramping that up a little bit. So let's get into that spot again. So without trusting all the tabs I have open up there, sometimes it's better to close them and start fresh, by the way, but I tend to leave them all open thinking I'll go back to them, but often I don't. All right, so students index the CS file, and now we're going to make our tweaks here. So if I remember, the first one's right around there somewhere. So right under the iList students thing, we're going to update this statement. So we're going to update that async. All right, you can see how we are now passing two parameters in sort order and the search string. That's the first change. And then we have name sort, date sort, and then we have current filter search string, which will be basically kind of inserted in there as, it's just capturing that incoming text. Then after the iQueryable thing, we're going to add this if statement. The iQueryable, of course, is using LINQ syntax, LINQ. And then basically this if statement is if the search string is, notice the exclamation or not empty, then it will execute that snippet of code. If not, it won't, right? And then we're just looking for This is kind of the link way by a Lambda statement to see if the thing that we typed in is contained or matches the search string that we typed in. I'm not sure that there's any more changes. There are no more. And then they go through and they start talking about, with the stuff that we just did. And I think I explained those pretty well. Then we have, kind of this topic here, and this is kind of a little bit deeper kind of programming topic. But when we're dealing with data structures in an app, we have different ways that we can format our data and organize it. And this little thing here talks about the difference between declaring something as I queryable versus I enumerable. An enumeration, of course, is kind of like a structure that is kind of fixed. In terms of like, hey, we have these particular options that we are have available to us, and I queryable is sort of the same type of thing, but it just indicates that the information is basically searchable. And I think the reason why they're comparing both of them is I think when you do iQueryable, really what it's returning as you're running it is an enumeration that you then use to drive your app, right? So that kind of is doing it on the fly. Yeah, they do talk about here about how the different type of databases kind of deal with it. So they're looking mostly at SQL Server and SQLite. And they're saying here, so if you're using SQLite to do this rather than the built-in server, that they're suggesting that you use ToUpper to make it case insensitive by default, because the way SQL Server handles that command is different than SQLite, and and truly different databases handle that stuff differently. So you kind of got to know your database a little bit. But if you're running into a problem, you're using SQLite to do this. That's the why. And they kind of just go through and give you more of an explanation to that as to why it works and the differences between the databases. So let's not really worry about that too much. The reason they talk about it, right? So a lot of us developers, when we're working with database and we want to work with data, sometimes we want a really lightweight database on the development side so that we're not like dealing with the overhead of SQL Server running on our system. We've talked about this before. SQLite is often a good choice because it's kind of serverless. You have the database, it's in essence a file, and you can kind of interact with it pretty easily when you're doing dev work. However, not all the features of it necessarily match up to the T-SQL language that Microsoft uses for SQL Server. So you do have to know your database, right? So like if you were using MySQL instead, or you're using MongoDB or whatever, you must adjust. Usually the adjustments are not huge though. All right, so now we're going to add a search button. So now we're going to go to Pages Students Index, the main index file, and we're going to add this form, and it's going to go right under the create new little link that we created before. So let's go back here. Now we're going to the index file, and we want it basically right here. Paste that in. All right. Let's do a save all at this point, because I think I made a couple changes without saving anything. And they're just using basically a standard form tag here. And I guess if you want to really kind of break the code down, and notice it's in the form of a get, and then they use basically a text input and a submit button. And then probably the only thing I think that's really kind of interesting here is the value, so in other words, there's a razor directive inside the value attribute of this text input field, which helps to trigger the razor code and make it dynamic, right? So so what are we filtering? Well, whatever we chose to filter with, and that would be the text that we typed in. So that becomes our filter, basically. That's what that's telling us. All right, so there's that change. And now they want us basically to test the app. And it says select the students tab, enter search string. For using SQLite, it's case insensitive. Okay, so we already talked about that. Not going to be too much of a issue for us. They do want us to look at the address bar once we do that. So let's run the app. I'm going to close the previous tab that was running. We're going to make sure everything's saved here. Then we're going to do a Control F5 to launch. Remember, Control F5 is launching without debugging, if you guys haven't memorized that yet. And now we have our search filter. So why don't we just type in a name that we know it's not going to find. It worked. You know, let's go back to the full list. And then let's put in, let's try a lowercase Jan and see if it finds that. It did. Let's see if it finds the uppercase version. Of course it did. Let's see if it finds a partial. It does. So Arturo, I just typed in art and it came up. And notice it's not worried about case, right? So this is working just fine. So a nice, quick little addition once again. And kind of some key takeaways here. Not a lot of code really to add the capability to make it work. So kind of a nice little feature here. All right. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add paging. And this is kind of an interesting thing here. And it says a paginated list class is created to support paging. That class uses skip and take statements to filter data on the server instead of retrieving all rows of the table. And so in other words, it is not going to put everything on the screen, right? And sometimes that's what you want. It's useful to not have to look at all the data. You just want to look at the stuff that matters, basically. And, you know, it's basically using, you know, these commands here to accomplish that. All right, so first thing that we have to do to make this happen is we do have to create a new class file. And it, you know, this is really kind of vague. This is in the project folder. I'm not really liking that too much. So I'm assuming it goes in the root. You can tell I'm not certain. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go look at that one solution and see where does paginated list.cs live. So we're going to go all the way back up to the top here. We're going to follow that link. We're going to use, well, isn't that there, right? Because that was like their last update is putting that, you know, I'm not sure what this code has been proposed but not tested. So you know what? I'm not going to go there then. Let's go back a click or two. And I'm looking for the completed thing. So I want to figure out where is that file living. And so you can see I'm not seeing it. In any of these spots. So I think that's really kind of weird, honestly. Yeah, and we know it's not going to be here. I highly doubt it, right? Those are just standard libraries. Yeah, not. These are snapshots. All right, so I'm going to go back to an even older version. I'm still looking for that paginated list. Okay. Okay, so they are putting it down in the root with the program.cs. That's where I'm going to put mine. Okay, so, and then if it doesn't work, well, hey, you know what? We'll move it. You so that's like the practical aspect. Now, this is, kind of weird, right? Because we're working with somebody else's code and somebody else's logic, and it might not be the same way that we think about accomplishing a task. But often as a programmer, you're put into these situations where it's like you're dealing with somebody else's code, and you're like, you got to fix something or change something or update something, and you got to find the stuff and figure out why it's there and how it works and whatever. So welcome to the club, basically. All right. So we decided where we're going to put that. So now let's go back to the instructions, which are way down here. Did that already. Add the form. And now we're adding paging. So, all right, here we go. So I'm going to copy all this code. We're going to create a file. And actually, let's copy the file name first. So we're just going to do paginated list. So we're going to create a class file in the root of the project, right? So this is my project root. I'm going to right click, add. We're just going to add a class file, C#, paste them in that name, adding it. You can see it down here. Now we're going to go ahead and grab all of this code. We're just going to replace all of it. Here it comes. And whew, no red underlines, right? That's always a relief. But you can see all the using statements in there. Notice that they have these, paginated list structure, which extends another list structure, page index, the total number of pages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, it looks like we have some statements in here that take the stuff and via async return the list. Okay, I just want to take a quick look at it. So Control S to save that. Yeah, so they're trying to point out here that the skip and take statements in here in order to get this to happen. And there's skip and there's take, right? All right. And this is kind of an interesting little statement that's catching my eye that I didn't know, which says the constructor can't create the paginated list object. Constructors can't run asynchronous code. Okay, so I did not know that. So you have to handle that separately. Interesting. All right. Now we're going to add page size to the app settings.json configuration file. So we're going to add page size 3. Highlight that code. Looks like they have it right up at the top. So we got to find that file now and add that right up to the top. Looking at the right spot. So they're putting it right above logging. So it doesn't mean it's exactly in the same spot. So we got to be really careful here, right before logging. All right, that looks good. Control S to save that one. Then we're going to add paging to the index model. So we're going to go to students index CS file, which I know we've had open here for a while, and it created an issue for us. So we're going to add this using statement. I'm just putting mine at the bottom. And then right inside private, or right after private read-only school context, we're adding this code. And notice it's kind of interesting. They're not including that final curly bracket. Let's see if there's a Y to that. Okay, so we're replacing this basically. So you can see I'm trying to be extra cautious here. I'm just replacing this with that. So now it looks the same. And then we're going to replace, or excuse me, add after public string current sort all of this code. All right. And I just want to make sure that we're them flowing correctly, and we are not. So I'm going to Control Z that. Right. The first change is okay. So now I'm looking really carefully at this. Let's do this one snippet at a time here. I'm going to grab this first. So that one I can see clearly. That just gets added here. All right, so basically what this statement here is replacing this one. So we'll just get rid of that one. And then async task on get async. So they're replacing it all the way up to current filter. So you see, like following the stream here is really pretty important. So they're replacing all of this. All right, so pasting. Okay, that looks good. Right, I'm just doing it back and forth to make sure we're in the right spot. I think we're all right there. One more change down here at the bottom. So after the switch case statement, we are replacing this line. And you can see it's underlining red because it's no longer valid with these two statements. And then we're doing a Control S to save. Sorry there, I'm taking a sip of my coffee if you guys are wondering. Probably should have paused it, but hey, that's how it goes. All right, so they go through and explain all the different stuff that they're doing here. So I would implore you to read this in detail so you understand, but I think the most probably important parts are kind of the structural changes that we're making. So we're changing the types of lists, from this list structure to the one that we just created and defined, right? So we're using our own definition instead. I think that's probably the most significant change here. All right, and they go through and they just explain all the different things. So notice that the current filter properly provides the Razor page with the current filter string, and it has to be included in the paging links in order to maintain the filter settings during paging. And then it must be restored to the text box when the page is redisplayed. And so they're basically allowing you a way to go back and forth from this paging mode to the non-paging mode. Right. So if it says if the search string is changed while paging, the page is reset to 1. The page has to be reset to 1 because the new filter can result in different data to display. Right. So what they're saying is like new starting point, when you're going to these modes. All right. Now we're going to go to the index file again, and then we're going to replace, once again, in the table, in the header rows, right? We're going to replace some code. So I'm just going to preemptively copy this. Let's make sure we're looking at the right file, students. Index. So students index. It seems like most of our work is here today, right? We'll replace the first TH code, right? And notice how now we're adding an ASP route filter directive here. It's another Razor directive. And then we have to add that to this as well. So we're putting one on the name and then one on the date, right? All right. So both of those are made. Control S to save. Now, way at the bottom, and notice this is after the table closes, we're adding some more Razor code. I want you to notice those like weird if statement things again going on here, right? Like, so what this is doing is there a previous page, right? And then notice the not, So if there isn't a previous page, we are disabling going to a previous page, right? And the same thing has next page. So if there's not a next page, then you disable the next button. See how that works, right? Then the code that you see here are basically the two links that we create. And because there's just so many attributes in these links, folks, that's why they're like putting each attribute on a separate line. It's just easier to code it and edit it, right? It could all be one long string. Right, so this gets added to the very bottom here after the table. Let's create a blank line. There's our new code. So we have basically a previous and next links that we created, and whether or not they're enabled or disabled is relative to these couple of if statements. So once again, Control S to save. All right. This next little thing does a little bit of explanation. So they're looking at the code that we added, both up in the headers, right? And once again, notice the attribute that controls the filter, right? So which one are we using? Whatever the current one is. And then the two links that we created. Right, so we're just about at the bottom of this one. So it says run the app and navigate to the students page to make sure paging works. Click the paging links in different sort orders and verify the paging works correctly with sorting and filtering, and enter a search string. And so we're going to just try this out. All right, let's just run it, and then we'll play with all the buttons and see what it does, and then see if determine if it's working or not. So I'm closing the previous instance. Let's do a save all, and then let's do Control F5 to launch without debugging. Let's get it to propagate in the browser here. Just take a moment, and there it is. Click on the students page. Okay, so now you can see that the students are not all appearing on the same page. This is by design, so I'm going to click next. Notice how there's not a previous, because we know these are the first last names in the list, so that's disabled because there is no previous. And then when I hit next, we get to the next listing of students, right? And now I can go back to the previous or next or next. Here the next is grayed out. And then on the separate pages, and I think this is interesting. So this, that seems a little broken to me, honestly. But what is it sorting? It's sorting the list based on the entire list, not what's on that page, right? So you kind of see the difference there. But the next and the previous buttons are working, and that's pretty cool. Now, we don't have a lot of stuff on the screen to really warrant paging, in my opinion. But it is kind of a nice thing when you are looking at data on a screen to think about, all right, well, the one thing I should say is I'm at 150% zoom. So, normally it would really be like this. So I could really handle a lot more data on the screen. But when I'm like screen recording, it's kind of nice to be able to see it. But normally I would say like maybe this could be 10 or 20 or 30 entries, and then you have a previous or a next, but it doesn't really demonstrate paging well if you don't have a lot of stuff to page through, right? But just to give you the underpinnings here. All right, so they basically want you to play with all the features and see how they work. And I'm sure I shouldn't be sure, right? If I do one of my search criteria, I can still find somebody, right? Upper, lowercase, whatever. All right, so I'm pretty content to think that my app is working as intended so far. All right, let's go back and go to the next little section here, which is grouping. And it says this section creates an about page that displays how many students have enrolled for each enrollment date. The update uses grouping and includes the following steps. So create a view model for the data used by the about page. So we're going to do that. Then we're going to update the about page to use the view model. All right, so first we're going to go to the models, school view models folder, and create this particular file. I'm going to start by copying the name, so I don't have to type it and get it wrong. So models, and And notice this folder doesn't exist. So we have to create school view models. So maybe the better thing to copy is this. Right now. So let's go to models, right click, add a folder. We'll just paste in the name, press enter, lock it in. I'm going to go back. I'm going to copy this name now. And then I'm going to right click, add a class with that name, save it. Let's open up that file here, and then we're going to replace the code in that file with this code. So let's just do Control A. Oops, over here, Control A, Control V, and it's updated. So we'll do a save. So basically, we're just creating another data model here. Notice there's a data annotation that just focuses on the date instead of the date time. It is optional. So we're going to list in an enrollment date with a get set, and then a count of students enrolled in that class. All right, so that's the data model. Now we're going to go ahead and create the Razor page. So we're going to go to pages about, or actually we're going to create under pages, we're going to create an about CS HTML file. So here under pages, we're going to right click and add. And let's do it this way because I don't see a CS HTML file quick link on the menu. So we're not going to do that. We want CS HTML. And the better way to do that is just to create a Razor page. It's interesting. I'm not sure how to. You know, I guess one way to do it is just click on these until you find the one that's got the, there we go. All right. Yeah, it's a Razor page, but it would make that just a little bit easier. And we're going to call this about. Adding that. And did we put that in the right spot? Under pages about, okay. I just want to make sure. And then we're going to copy all of this code and replace what's there. Right. Notice how the it picks up, you know, automatically, you know, the model for it. S, Control S to save. Now we're going to create the CS file that came with that. So if you click here, you'll notice there's a CS file, and we're going to update that code. And it's just easier, I think, to just replace it all. Right? Notice all the links to all the stuff that we've created before. The iQueryable is in there. Context class and all the different libraries there. We do save. Right. And they're talking a little bit here about this link statement, and they're, you know, and that's in the iQueryable that groups the student entities by enrollment date, calculates the number of entities in each group, and stores the result in a collection called enrollment date group. Right. So that's kind of the thing, and that's how it creates that. Right. So it looks up the students, the enrollments, and then selects all that and drops it in there, and then it does a count, and it has the date group key in it as well. So now they want us to run the app and navigate to the about page. The count of students for each enrollment date is displayed in a table. Right. So let's do that, and that will round out this little segment here. So back over to the Visual Studio here, and we're going to do a Control F5 to repropagate. So we're pushing it fresh back into the browser. Waiting for it to happen, and it's not happening. All right. Let's go back to the browser and close the running tab. And then let's do it again. All right, so Control F5. Let's see how fast that launched. Now notice the inclusion of an about, right? So by adding that top level page, this became available, right? So here's about, here are the dates, and here's the count. And if you notice, right, like compared to their example, looks like we're getting the same results they are. So chances are it's working correctly. And then of course, if you change some of the data underneath or add dates or whatever, this should update. And that would be helpful, obviously. All right, so I'm going to call this segment of the tutorial complete. And this video will end here, and then I will record a separate video for the next part.